The Miami Dolphins officially announced their initial 53-man roster on Tuesday afternoon, but so did a lot of other NFL teams. And there are a lot of players that are pretty good that got waived or cut by their respective teams. And on today's show, I'm going to scour the waiver wire, like this is fantasy football, and see what players I believe Miami could or should go out and claim/sign to the roster, which would be upgrades over what they already have. And make sure you are subscribed, by the way, because we will have a video out on Wednesday afternoon recapping all of the Dolphins' moves, because they will make moves to clear roster spot for Rasul Douglas. They will probably put in multiple waiver claims. That will be processed around noon Eastern time. So turn on notifications, subscribe, so you don't miss that video we put out tomorrow. All right, when I'm thinking about what Miami clearly needs after their 53-man roster was revealed, one is cornerback depth. Another one is running back for early in the season, since Jalen Wright is going to miss the first week of the year, and your only two healthy backs is Ollie Gordon and Devon Achane, and well, Achane's not even fully healthy. Also a swing tackle. The offensive tackle depth on this group is absolutely horrific. Plus a tight end. Darren Waller remains MIA at times. Julian Hill stinks, and Tanner Connor cannot be a tight end one. So we're going to start by looking at some running back targets. One of them is Cam Akers, the veteran who flashed onto the scene early in his career, just has fizzled out. He was released by the New Orleans Saints. He is a veteran that could bring some juice to Miami for a couple weeks. Another interesting name is Damien Martinez, the 7th-round pick out of the University of Miami. He was with the Seattle Seahawks. He ultimately get waived. Could Miami add another back that was drafted in late day 3 of this draft? Another interesting one is the Denver Broncos running back, Estime. He has actually been around the league for a while and had a pretty solid preseason. We'll look at his numbers here in just 1 second. And the last one that I'm interested in is a familiar face in Jeff Wilson, the veteran running back signed in the middle of the preseason with the San Francisco 49ers. And I said at the moment that I believe Miami would have signed Jeff Wilson to their roster after the Alexander Madison injury instead of a Mike Boone or Aaron Shamklin. The only downside is the 49ers signed Wilson 24 hours before the Dolphins knew about that Madison injury. So Wilson is a player that I would have added during the preseason. I could see Miami adding again. But when you look at these 4 backs and how they fared for their respective teams in the preseason, the clear-cut best back was actually the running back from Denver, Audric Estime, who ran for 66 yards on 16 carries and even got in the end zone, a little bit more efficient than Jeff Wilson, despite Jeff having one more touchdown. Martinez and Akers did not look that solid in their preseason kind of 3 games. But if I am thinking about which player I would like to add, Damien Martinez is the one I want the most, the running back from the U, because he has a lot of youth to him. He has a lot of upside. This is a guy that ran for 1,000 yards last season in the city of Miami with Cam Ward, averaged a ton of yards after contact, and would be a great player to stash as this RB4 and then maybe even on the practice squad as well, with Jalen Wright being injured. And he's not anticipated to play, but his insurance says that RB3. Now, if I'll be honest, I would expect Miami to go after Jeff Wilson the most due to the familiarity. He knows the Mike McDaniel scheme inside and out. He ran well for Miami at the end of last season. He runs hard in general and would just be a very stable back that this team would have confidence in as an RB3. God forbid Ollie Gordon and Devon Achane get hurt early in the year and they have to turn their eyes to another back. So I would want Damien Martinez, but I believe there is a better chance that the Dolphins add Jeff Wilson other than the other backs that we just mentioned. But let me know which Dolphin position should be targeted. We're not asking about player just yet. What position should Miami go after the most, whether it's running back, tight end, offensive line, cornerback, or maybe there's another one? Let me know your thoughts. I'm going to focus on the tight end targets next. One of them is Greg Dulcich, who was waived by the New York Giants. This one was a bit of a surprise. Marshall Green at Giants Now wanted Dulcich on the 53-man roster. He had a strong preseason. We'll look at his numbers in a second. How about Jelani Woods, the massively sized former Virginia Cavalier? He was waived by the Indianapolis Colts. Not that surprising because he hasn't been able to stay on the football field, has an injury history, hasn't been as productive, but I am fascinated with the idea of Woods, and I'll tell you why in here in just 1 second. And then one player as well I would keep an eye on, Jaheim Bell, the 7th-round pick out of Florida State in the 2024 NFL Draft. What is prioritized in this Dolphins system under Mike McDaniel at tight end? The tight end has to have an ability to run, not only be athletic with the ball in his hands, but also run across their formation, get into his blocking, a lot of tight end movements before the snap actually happens. I think Bell could potentially work in there, just was never able to find his footing in New England. There's another one also, Harrison Bryant, which could be intriguing. He was released by the Texans after they acquired him in the John Mechie trade. But if we're going to be honest, I need Jelani Woods or Greg Dulcich the most. And Dulcich is a player that intrigues me. It's a former 3rd-round pick out of UCLA, was drafted by the Denver Broncos, really never stuck there. Actually had a pretty solid rookie season. This was in the 2022 NFL Draft, by the way. But he balled out for the Giants this year. 7 receptions, 53 yards, and 3 tutties in those 3 preseason games, including one in the finale against the New England Patriots. Dulcich maybe putting some things together, could be worth a flyer for the Miami Dolphins. I certainly believe he is on the same tier as a player like Julian Hill and Tanner Connor. But Jelani Woods is the one I am focusing on. Why? In that same draft, by the way, 2022, he was a 3rd-round pick by the Indianapolis Colts. This is a massive human being, 6'7", 253. He had 7 receptions for 75 yards in this preseason, so actually a more efficient showing. Same receptions, more yards for Woods, just wasn't able to find pay dirt. But another reason why I'm intrigued, as mentioned, you need to have the ability to run in this Dolphins system as a tight end. Well, how about this? Woods is 6'7", 253, but ran a 4.6 40 during his combine in the 2022 NFL draft process. He's still very mobile. He's still very quick. He just has dealt with injuries. If he's able to put a full season together, this would be a very solid, cheap option in this tight end room that I think would pick up the Dolphins' offensive scheme very, very quickly. If I had to rank these tight ends on which one I would want to sign the most, Jelani Woods would be number 1, with Greg Dulcich as number 2, and then you could throw a toss-up there between Jaheim Bell and Harrison Bryant. We're going to look at some more positions here in 1 second, but get started with Prize Picks Today, the sponsor of this edition of Dolphins Today, the daily fantasy sports platform I play every day. And with football officially here, I cannot be more excited. College football this weekend. The professional league gets underway next week. You can get in on the action for Saquon, Burrow, Tua, Hill, Waddle, Acham. It's so simple to play. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. If you get your picks right, you could cash in and win up to 2,000 times your money. PrizePicks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. Double your money even if one of your picks does not hit. I have an entry in for the first week of college football. How about Haynes King less than passing yards? Georgia Tech takes on Colorado Friday night. I'll go less than Arch Manning against Ohio State, 1.5 passing touchdowns. And I'll round out my 3-player entry with Deshaun Bishop, the Tennessee running back, more than 61.5 rushing yards. 3-player entry there. But you can get in on the action, follow my picks, fade my picks, but download the PrizePicks app today. Use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That is code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Going to focus on some offensive line targets now. One being La'el Collins. The veteran has bounced around the league quite a bit, has not played an actual snap in a regular season game since 2022. Former Dallas Cowboy was released by the Cowboys after signing with them about a month ago. He's an interesting option. How about Dan Skipper, the offensive tackle from Detroit, the infamous offensive lineman that caught that pass on primetime that was ultimately called back due to an illegal formation. 6'7", put up solid numbers last season. We'll take a look at those in just 1 second. But the player that I want to highlight the most here is Kendall Lamm, the offensive lineman who was with the Miami Dolphins last season. left in free agency, signed with the Eagles, gets released. I absolutely could see a reunion between Lamm and Miami. And the final player I'll mention on this show is Trent Brown, the massive bodied offensive tackle who has bounced around the league with the Raiders, the 49ers, the Patriots, was with the Texans, but ultimately gets waived. And if we're going to be honest, if we're talking this time tomorrow that the Dolphins added any of those 4 guys, I really wouldn't complain. I certainly have my preferences, but if they added any of those 4, I would have a smile on my face. But I will label Kendall Lamm as the number 1 option for Miami without question, and I would label him as the most likely as well because he knows this system, and he played a decent amount for the Dolphins last season. Actually played 512 snaps. That's not a little amount of snaps. That is a lot for a rotational tackle, and had really good PFF numbers. An 83.1 pass blocking grade is the one that highlights it, especially when he gave up no sacks and was only penalized 1 time last season. He had to come in and play in relief for Austin Jackson, the right tackle for this team, when he went down midway through the year for the season. Well, the Dolphins didn't really have that big of a setback on their right tackle spot because Lamm did play so well. The issue with the O-line last year was more up the middle with Robert Jones and Liam Eichenberg being the left guard and right guard. Kendall Lamm would be the best offensive tackle behind Paul and Jackson. He'd be better than Larry Borom. He would certainly be better than Keon Smith. So if Kendall Lamm still wants to play football, which I believe he does, and he wants to play with the Miami Dolphins, the Dolphins should be getting him back to the 305 ASAP. But the other 2 that I would probably highlight outside of Lamm, Trent Brown and Dan Skipper. Skipper played in 322 snaps last year. Brown only in 139. Trent Brown suffered a season-ending injury after the 3rd week of the season, where he was actually off to a pretty solid start for the Bengals. Was with the Texans in this preseason here as he recovers from injury. Skipper played, like I mentioned, 320 snaps, came in relief, inline tight end, extra blocker. I just feel as if both of these guys would be better than Larry Borom and better than Keon Smith, which is why I put them on this list, because if you're better than what the Dolphins have at depth now, I think it's worth adding, especially with how poor the second and third line offensive line looked for Miami this preseason. We'll round out by talking about some defensive backs. Another familiar face that we mentioned on Monday as well, Nik Needham, the defensive back who was a UDFA success story for the Fins, was with the Browns, got waived. He's an interesting name that we'll have to monitor. How about Jayln Armour-Davis, the Baltimore Ravens cornerback? This is a 6'1" CB that ran a 4.3 40. Extremely athletic, has a lot of elite physical traits for a cornerback in the NFL, has familiarity with Anthony Weaver. Weaver was on that coaching staff when Armour-Davis was with the Ravens over the past couple of seasons, before Weaver obviously joined the Dolphins coaching staff. And then a couple other CB targets. A late round pick. Actually, was he a UDFA? Yeah, he was. Cobee Bryant was a UDFA. Remember, this was the Kansas corner that went undrafted, signed with the Atlanta Falcons, a player that I was spamming the Dolphins to draft in the final couple rounds of this past April's draft. He gets waived. Maybe Miami ultimately spins the block and takes on Cobee Bryant now. And another interesting player, former mid-round pick Eli Ricks, who has actually appeared in about 30 games for the Eagles in his career. This is a fascinating player that I would probably say is better than Ethan Bonner, probably better than a Cam Smith. So Ricks would definitely be worth taking a shot on. But when you're thinking about adding a corner to this 53-man roster on waivers, I think Nik Needham and Jayln Armour-Davis are the 2 most intriguing guys, not only due to talent and productivity in the past in this National Football League, but it's because of their familiarity with defensive coordinator Anthony Weaver. I mentioned it with Armour-Davis. He played under Weaver when he was a member of that Ravens defensive staff, and Jayln was with the Ravens a couple years ago. And then Nik Needham was in the Dolphins training camp and preseason all last season, was waived on roster cutdown day, and ultimately found a home elsewhere for the 2024 campaign. Maybe Miami could spin the block on Nik Needham, bring him back in for this 2025 year. I certainly would take him over a player like Isaiah Johnson and a player like Cam Smith. I mean, that's just how the cookie crumbles, in my opinion. So if I'm adding a corner, I'm looking at Nik Needham or Jayln Armour-Davis. But you let me know, who should the Dolphins sign/claim between now and the waiver wire being officially announced at noon Eastern time? So let me know your thoughts down in the comment section. I'm going to rank my top 10 out of the 15 players we talked about today, but let me know yours down below. So combining all of the positions, all of the players that we talked about today, number one for me is the 7th round pick out of Miami, Damien Martinez. I want to get my hands on him. I want to have him as this RB4, potentially a practice squad guy. We'll ultimately see. And then that tight end from Virginia, the 6'7", 4'6", 40-yard running demon, Jelani Woods. I feel like Mike McDaniel will get the best out of him. And then I'll go with the veterans and Kendall Lamm, Dan Skipper, Greg Dulcich at tight end, Jeff Wilson at number 6, Needham at 7, Armour-Davis at 8, Cobee Bryant at 9, and then to round it out, Audric Estime at number 10 with some of those other players that we talked about, but I would rank them between 11 through 15. But I hope Miami at least gets one of these guys in free agency or the waiver wire because they need to add to this roster at those 4 positions. Cornerback depth, tight end, running back depth, and what was the other one? O-line. I thought I said O-line, but I guess I didn't. Either way, if the Dolphins do sign a player or claim someone off the waiver wire, we will have you updated first on my Twitter, at Nic_Rohloff, so go give me a follow. But then we will also make a video recapping all of the news and moves the Dolphins make. So hit that sub button, follow me on Twitter, and I'll see you tomorrow with all of that news. Go Fins.